Today on Locked On Red Wings, should the Detroit Red Wings make a play for Aaron Ekblad of the Florida Panthers?
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm formerly of 97.1 The Ticket, where Scotty's a host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And today's episode is going to be a trade hypothetical, right? There's a few reasons for this trade hypothetical of Aaron Ekblad. One, prior to free agency, and so, a good 10 days ago now, there was a report from David Pagnotta that Aaron Ekblad could be on the trade block for the Florida Panthers, as they had to extend, Sam Reinhart and get under the cap and all that. And as it stands right now, they are not under the cap and have too many players on the roster. So I figured now would be a good time to maybe talk about it. Other big reason is it's the offseason. We have 5 days a week to fill in July here, so we figured it'd be a fun conversation to kind of bring you guys this trade hypothetical. Because while it might not be the most realistic, which we'll get into here in segment one, this is a situation the Florida Panthers might have to deal with, like, in seriousness about a year from now. And Bill Zito, the general manager, has a history of making blockbuster trades. So while it might not be the most realistic, that doesn't mean that it can't happen either. So we'll talk about that and so much more. But first, I got to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Also want to thank you guys for making Locked On Red Wings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. So, Scotty, let's kind of circle back to that where I started, right? Aaron Ekblad, 28-year-old right-handed defenseman in the final year of a contract where he's making $7.5 million. He is a force to be reckoned with on the back end with the Florida Panthers, and he also would fill a huge need for the Detroit Red Wings, which is that impact right side demon that we keep hammering home. And the Florida Panthers are in a weird position now where, and this is what happens when you win a Stanley Cup, is there's ultimately going to end up being sacrifices somewhere along the way, whether it be this year or next year. I just want to ask the question, do you see a future where Aaron Ekblad is traded away by the Florida Panthers after we heard these rumors from David Pagnotta? I believe Emily Kaplan even addressed it on TSN too. So there's a little bit of smoke here. I don't know if there's a fire, but there's a little bit of smoke here, at least in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think that there is very much a world in which they do trade him. I don't think that it's the most likely world, right? Like I do think that the most likely scenario, if you were to ask me today, would still be that he's just on the Panthers and that they kick the can down the road and they'll deal with that problem next summer, right? And they go, you know what? Well, the goal is to be the best team in hockey, and there's an argument that we are that, speaking as obviously the Panthers, and he's a big reason why Ekblad is. And so I think that there's a very, very real possibility, and I would say the most likely scenario is still that they just hold on to him throughout this season. And again, they kind of deal with that problem when they reach it, which would be a lot more next season or next off season rather. I do think though that there is a chance, and the reason why would be kind of the reasons you already laid out, right? Like the reason why would just be, we want to get out ahead of it. The earlier you trade someone, the more years of control you trade someone, the more value they're going to have, obviously. And, he's up against the end of that contract anyways. But I do think that it's not a ridiculous conversation for us to have. I do think that it is enough in the realm of possibility where it's worth a discussion at a minimum.
Right. And if you're the Florida Panthers, obviously you're looking down the barrel of a choice here. It's either you do what you did with Jonathan Huberdeau, right? Like you trade Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar and you get Matthew Tkachuk. You create some form of blockbuster trade. I mean, not saying that with the Red Wings it would be a blockbuster trade, but you make a trade for a player that is younger and you have more control over so that you can keep the window open longer. And you can see it paid dividends, right? Matthew Tkachuk ended up helping to lead the Florida Panthers to their first Stanley Cup after Huberdeau helped them get a President's Trophy. So
Right.
Bill Zito saw a future problem forming, especially with, Huberdeau needing a new contract sooner. And he addressed it before it was a problem. And there's a situation here with Aaron Ekblad where, okay, for instance, the Florida Panthers are currently at 24 men on their roster. You can only have 23. They're also at negative 933,000 cap space. So that was really the main reason why I decided to actually have this conversation finally, because it's kind of been kicking around. I've seen a few comments from our listeners asking us to talk about the Aaron Ekblad thing, but it was just really mostly smoke, right? It was something that David Pagnotta had mentioned, but we hadn't heard anything since. So I didn't want to give too much credence to it. And there's still not a lot of credence to it. But just given the fact that they're over the cap space, we're like, okay, we can at least have the conversation, even if, again, guys, there's not any substance here. No insiders reporting outside of Pagnotta 2 weeks ago that this is a real thing. But it is an issue that I think that the Florida Panthers are going to run into. They're over the cap. They're over the roster limit. But I think that's also a really easily fixable issue for the Florida Panthers, one where you don't have to dump a guy who's making $7.5 million. Less than a mil.
Nothing. Yeah,
right.
You can get back to positive pretty easily.
You can trade somebody who makes $1 million away, or if somebody goes on the LTIR or waive somebody at training camp, there's a million different ways where they can get back under the cap, and this isn't a situation that they have to deal with this year. And with the departure of David Montour, who left to Seattle for, I think, a 7-year deal, ridiculously great contract, having Aaron Ekblad, a former Calder winner and a former number one overall pick, on your roster, it emphasizes that need if you want to run it back. But then you run the risk, because I can't see, as I'm looking at their roster on Puckpedia, because rest in peace, Cap Friendly. I'm looking right now on Puckpedia, and they have Sam Bennett they have to pay next offseason. They have Carter Verhaeghe that they have to pay next offseason as well. So, you're going to have a lot of expensive contracts coming up real fast here. And if you have to make a decision on who you're going to keep and who you're not going to keep. So that's going to decide, I think, a big part of where they go from here. And it might be better for them if they make that decision now and make that trade to get usable assets in return that are cheaper to extend the window, rather than running it back for another year and letting these assets walk at free agency. So that's where it's it's not heavily plausible because of the fact that they can easily get under the cap and run it back. But because of Bill Zito's history and the contracts that are coming up soon, it is something that isn't also impossible.
Yeah, exactly. And I still think there's a very real possibility they just go, you know what? We have one of the best rosters in the sport. We're just going to run it back and deal with that next summer. And I think that's probably the most likely scenario, like I said. But
Me too.
I mean, when it comes down to, I don't know, I'm pretty fascinated in the value, right? What would it take to get a player of that caliber, albeit on the last year of a contract like that? I mean, you're getting essentially a rental, a year rental if you were to trade for him right now. And I think that's another reason why I would lean towards it not happening, is because I actually don't think the return would be oh, this is the King's ransom. This is the God return type of thing. It wouldn't be cheap. I'm not trying to say you can get them for nothing, but I don't think the ends would justify the means with that. I just don't think from the Panthers' perspective that what they're probably going to get for a year of him is going to be worth giving. It's not the same situation where oh, you're going to get Kachuk. It's, you know what I mean? I think you're probably not going to get some star young controllable player for albeit what is a rental.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to have that conversation regarding to what it would cost to get him, and then as well, like we said, he has 1 year left on his deal. That conversation too, because that would require surgery for the Red Wings, and I think that's a pretty major con. But I want to talk about the pros first, because Aaron Ekblad, if we're working on the assumption that the Red Wings would trade for Aaron Ekblad and the Florida Panthers would be open to it, right? Because this is a hypothetical. We're talking about a world where this happens. How would he benefit the Detroit Red Wings? Well, we'll tell you that in segment 2. You like that? Not segment 2. Good Lord. Now I'm getting ahead of myself. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. For real this time. It's actually segment 2. Not like how it's been a trend recently where I'd be like, segment 2, and it's like, oh no, I still have to like read the thing. Scotty, Aaron Ekblad would be, I mean, without a doubt, a huge upgrade on this. He would be, if they got Aaron Ekblad, I would be pretty confident in saying that this team would be a legitimate threat to make the playoffs next year. Far more so than they are this year. I mean, this is a guy who, he does a little bit of everything with the Florida Panthers. And he's just, where do I even begin? Okay, so 5-on-5, right? He has the fourth most 5-on-5 ice time a game for all defensemen among the Florida Panthers. He has the third most power play time per game amongst all defensemen on the Florida Panthers, and he's the second most penalty kill time amongst all defensemen on the Florida Panthers. He's a positive relative in every feasible stat. Dangerous Fenwick 4, Corsi 4, expected goals for percentage. Like, this is he's big and he's mean. He draws a lot of penalties. He takes penalties, sure, but that's part of his game. He's big, 6'4". He's very physical, and you imagine a pair where he and Simon Edvinsson are together, and you think, oh my goodness, our top 4 is legitimately scary at that point. Like, your weakest link on your top 4 at that point is what, Ben Sherratt? I mean, it's just, if you have Seider, Edvinsson, and Ekblad, I really find it hard to believe that that's not a defensive core that couldn't make the playoffs next year.
Oh yeah, I mean the pros and the why would the Wings do it are pretty obvious. Right. They kind of slap you in the face. It's not doesn't take a rocket scientist to kind of figure out why he would be such a huge addition. You know, for a blue line that we talk so much about and have talked at nauseum about already this offseason and obviously during the regular season as well. You know, this would be such a clear and bona fide upgrade to your right side. And I mean, man, that would, the depth that you would create, right? We talk about that all the time too, is like additions aren't just valuable because of the talent they're bringing to where they're at. They're also valuable because they push everyone down as well. And that's pretty much exactly what you would be doing here, right? You would, that second pair, just kind of black hole on the right side would get filled, and you could use, you know, whatever you want to say, Petrie or whatnot on the third pair. You've talked about that a lot, and how that's a lot more justifiable than him on the second pair. And it would, again, like there's an argument your biggest team need right now on July 11th is right side second pair D. And so absolutely. The fact that we're talking about bringing in a player of this caliber who, like you said, was a number 1 overall pick, was a Calder winner, is now a Stanley Cup champion, and is still only 28 years old. You know, having a conversation of bringing him in to fill maybe your biggest team need right now is absolutely a slam dunk on paper. This is not why you don't do it, right? Like
right.
Bringing him in and what he would provide on the ice is certainly not going to be a reason why he's not going to be a Red Wing.
Yeah, I just, it's not even like when you see players of that caliber and you think to yourself, okay, where's the downside? In his game, I don't really know where there's an obvious downside. Like, he just does a little bit of everything, and even his point totals last year, like, he only had 18 points in 51 games. Okay, he's not much of a goal scorer. He's not the first. He's not even really the second option on power play, but he did average about a minute 18, I think it was. Let me double check on that.
I mean, even that
on power play.
That's
that was a
kind of an
down year for
outlier
him.
too.
It
You look at
was.
the rest of his career, it's 14, 15, 11, 13, 6, like as far as goals scored goes, right? Like and he missed, 20 games this season as well, which certainly didn't help, but
Yeah, it was at the start of the season. I think their
yeah.
last Stanley Cup final run wore him down. I think he had surgery in the last offseason and came
Yeah.
back partway through. And that's what I was building up to, too, Scotty. Like, 18 points. He did still average a minute and 26 per game on the power play. So, like, it's not like he didn't get plenty of power play time on the team. It's just Brandon Montour really led the way in that regard. But, he like you said, that last season was an outlier for him. He had a career high of 57 points the year they won the the President's Trophy, and that was in 61 games. So he was nearly a point per game from the back end. While that was a little bit of an outlier in the other end, but he's pretty consistently been a 30 to 40 point guy throughout most of his career, even dating back to his rookie season when he had 39 points in 81 games. So, like, this is a guy who can provide you offense, defense, and gets difficult deployments. I don't want that to get lost either, because that's something we always harp on, right? Like, it's good to be relative positive to your teammates, but it also depends on where you're put on your team. And he is the only defenseman on the Florida Panthers, Scotty, who got over 50% defensive zone deployments compared to offensive zone deployments. He got the second toughest competition on the team next to Gustav Forsling, but even Forsling got just a hair over 50% offensive zone deployment. I know I'm splitting hairs there, but I just want to emphasize that not only can he do it all, he did it all while facing the toughest competitions and getting, being the only one on the team to get more defensive zone deployments than offensive zone deployments. With that, I do also want to note that obviously Aaron Ekblad was playing with some of the most premier talent on the floor with the Florida Panthers as well, like Alexander Barkov, Sam Reinhart types that could absolutely possess the hell out of the puck and make playing defense a lot easier. But those relative numbers still speak to the idea that he was helping to create that environment and not just benefiting off of that environment. Not saying he'll come to Detroit and be just as good as he was with the Stanley Cup winning Panthers, but he is going to have a huge, massive positive impact year one with the Detroit Red Wings. The question then just becomes, how would you get him? How would you keep him? And what would the cap structure look like if you did?
Correct. Yeah, because not only are we talking about a guy, with a lot of these trade hypotheticals, it's, what would the price be to obtain him? And that is a question, but then you also have tagged on to that, the presumption would be you don't make that trade if you're not willing to extend him. So it's a double-edged sword there. You're not only giving up assets to acquire him, you're then giving up cap to extend him immediately after as well. And that is the probably a lot more than $1 million question.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really tough. And honestly, I don't even want to start dissecting that until we get to segment 3, because that's going to be the bulk of this conversation in reality is it possible to get him? What would it take to get him? What would it take to keep him? So let's just go to a quick early break, and then we'll talk about that in segment 3. Got to talk to you guys today about GameTime. GameTime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. With last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. And you save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. Save even more when you choose a section and let GameTime choose the seats for you. There are so many ways for you guys to save money when using GameTime. And those all-in prices, it's a feature you can toggle in your settings, helps you show the total up front so you don't get surprised with fees at checkout. So the lowest price guarantee allows you to credit 110% of the difference if you find the same seats somewhere else for less. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scotty, I don't want to call them cons, because Aaron Ekblad as a player doesn't really have a lot of cons. It's mostly just situations surrounding his cap and the trade. But what are the cons to acquiring Aaron Ekblad, not as Aaron Ekblad the player?
Yeah. Like we said before the break, I think just what it would take, all things considered, to get him, the money you'd have to set aside to extend him, along with the assets you would have to give up to obtain him. I think they're one of the reasons why there may not be a fit there is because the Panthers, if they were going to trade him, would probably want someone who is young and NHL ready, who can go in and be a producer right away. I have a hard time believing that the Panthers are going to be too big on, especially from the Wings perspective, where like any picks or anything they would give up in that regard would not be, like we're not going to be picking in the top 5 next year, right? Like it's not going to be like a premier pick either. The only thing that the Wings have a cabinet full of that they could trade would be young prospects who aren't necessarily like knocking on the door of the NHL. Now, they have plenty of guys who are knocking on the door of the NHL as well. We talk about those guys often, but I don't think the Wings are looking to give up guys who are knocking on the door of the NHL. So it's a weird fit in terms of lining up a trade. Like the Wings are obviously in a position where they want to retain and continue developing their young talent that is borderline NHL ready. And the Panthers are in win now mode, and I don't think they're going to be asking for draft picks or for and there might be a pick or two involved, but like I don't think they're going to be asking for assets that are years away from being NHL ready. I think if they do trade him, it's going to be, like you said, something similar to the trade they made a couple of years ago, where they're still getting young, good, just more controllable talent at the NHL level.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. They're not going to want somebody that's going to take 2, 3, 4 more years to develop. I do think a first-round pick would be involved. They don't have.
I agree.
This next draft upcoming in 2025, they don't have a pick in the first 3 rounds. So I think a first-round draft pick would be, and which I'd be willing to give up, for a guy of Aaron Ekblad's caliber. It's just the rest of the trade that would be difficult, because the Red Wings are also in a situation where they don't have $7.5 million to just have a player of Aaron Ekblad's caliber on their roster. They'd have to move money out. And I think that's the biggest hurdle for the Detroit Red Wings right now is the surgery that would be required to acquire a guy like him. You'd either have to convince them to take, I don't know, would they be open to taking a Michael Rasmussen at $3.2 million? Like, this isn't a situation like EA Sports NHL where you can just add guys in until the value's there. Because I know you and I aren't willing to part with a guy like Dylan Larkin, or I don't see a reality where they'd want an Andrew Kopp or $5.6 million underperforming his contract. Like, it'd be really hard, and Steve has already said money's really hard to move right now. There's a lot of guys on this team where it's just like, okay, I'd move them to bring in Aaron Ekblad, but would the Panthers want these players in return for Aaron Ekblad? Right. And I don't see that as a reality. Like, maybe Marco Kasper and Nate Danielson are guys that they see as somebody they would want because they're close to being ready and they're under team control and they could help extend that window. But those are also guys that the Red Wings want to open their window, right? Like, you pry open your window a little bit sooner by getting a guy at 28 years old in Aaron Ekblad, but then you burn assets for your own longevity by doing so. And like, listen, I've said before, part of the reason why you build up such a big cabinet is so that you can use some of those pieces in trades to make your team more well-rounded, right? Because you take the best player available in the draft, and sometimes you end up with an abundance at a certain position. This is a reality, but it's just, you have to be real. If you want a guy of Aaron Ekblad's quality, you have to be willing to part with somebody who's of quality in return, because I just don't see them. They're not going to want Justin Holl, who makes $3.4 million back, and you got to move a couple guys to make this work, because while the Red Wings have almost $20 million in cap space, the bulk majority of that, if not all of it, is going to go to the remaining RFAs. So it's a weird situation where
you have an extension.
Right, and then you have an extension to worry about the next offseason.
Not only if you have carved out that money for this year, you got to carve out that money for the next however long, 4 to 6, 7 years.
Even more money. Because he's gonna get a pay raise. This is gonna be his big contract of his career. He's gonna be 29 when this contract expires. He's a proven winner who can do it all, like there's no way he's not going to get an upgrade over the $7.5 million he's doing already. And that's why the surgery is the hardest part, and I think is the biggest reason why this trade wouldn't happen and will not happen more than likely, even though it's a fun conversation, and I like to dream about Ekblad and Seider as pairs 1 and 2, or Seider and Ekblad, rather, pairs 1 and 2. I want to make sure I get that straight so people don't bite my head off, on the Detroit Red Wings, and how much easier everyone's, not just Seider's, right? We talk so much about how much easier Seider's life would be if we got a competent second pair right side D. But Aaron Ekblad makes everybody's life easier on the whole team by having him there. But the surgery doesn't make sense unless you can get a third team involved. If you can get a third team involved who's a team that's looking to eat salary, who's a team that's looking to add players. Like, I know the Anaheim Ducks are above the cap floor now, but they're still far away from the ceiling, and they're still a team that could use a couple of reliable veterans, or the San Jose Sharks, right? Like, there's several teams that are that way right now. I just don't see how a trade between these two teams for Aaron Ekblad is possible without the Detroit Red Wings giving up something massive in return to free up the cap space to not just get him, but then extend him. Because that's another thing, right? And you touched on it. You're not trading for Aaron Ekblad for one season. Like, if you're trading for Aaron Ekblad, the idea would be to then extend him as well. Because if you trade a bunch of assets to acquire Aaron Ekblad, and then he walks in free agency, you've set your rebuild back. You may have made the playoffs that 1 year, but you've set your rebuild back. He's a player that if you're trading for, you need to keep.
Yeah, 100%, and I agree with you. I think that is probably the biggest hurdle, and just the lining up of the, again, like the asset management of in the motivations, I guess I'll say, of both teams and what both teams are trying to accomplish. I'm not really sure it lines up. And we can end how we started, right? At the end of the day, there's a pretty darn good chance that the Panthers just go, you know what, we're going to keep one of our best players, right, and we'll deal with this issue a year from now.
Right. I really think that that's going to be what the situation is. And again, while Bill Zito has a track record now of doing these big blockbuster trades for guys that were core members of his team to try and upgrade his team for the long term, and it obviously panned out. They went to back-to-back finals and won the Stanley Cup. So, like, it does work out for the Detroit, or for the Florida Panthers in the past, but that doesn't mean that they're going to do it again when, especially again, with Brandon Montour gone, they need Aaron Ekblad more than ever. So the answer is yes, I would kill for Aaron Ekblad. But I just don't see it making sense or being all that realistic for either parties at this stage of the game. I want him, but I don't know if the cost to acquire him is going to be worth it, especially if he doesn't extend.
Right. Agreed.
All right. Scotty, do you have any final thoughts?
I don't think so, man. We ball.
We do ball. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to give you a version 1 of our roster, our opening night predictions. Obviously, there's still a lot of offseason left to be played, so who knows who makes the team and who gets traded for this offseason still. But as it sits right now, it's a 23-man roster, so we're going to do our best to kind of give you an idea of who on this current roster will be and where they will be on night 1 of the Detroit Red Wings 25-26 season, or 24-25 season, rather, getting a year ahead. So, yeah, ready for that tomorrow. Same time, same place. It's your team.
Enthusiastic.
Every day.
Every day.